Welcome to Switch Comics. My name is Marco, and today I want to talk about why you are pricing your comics wrong. Now, this could be whether you're trying to sell comics or buy comics, you need to know the value of the comics you're dealing with. So, let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, I'm not a big fan of all these different websites. You have your Go Collect or, whatever. The issue with these, and if, sometimes it's okay to use them. But the issue with these is anything that's going to gather data and make averages can get a little dicey for a numerous amount of reasons. One being that it takes time to get your listing or get all your information together, and a lot of these things don't stay really up to date. So you can have information that can be from quite a while ago, something new, there's a new TV show announced or something, and maybe it's been in the past few days. You don't have that data on there yet. So for me personally, I always find it's best to see recent, active activity to see what is going on with any particular comic. So that being said, I personally use eBay sold listings, which will bring me to my first point. If you use eBay active listings, 99.99% of the time you're doing it wrong. I'll get into it a little bit later. There are some times you can use an eBay active listing as a reference, but 99.99% of the time you want to be using eBay sold listings. That one's pretty obvious. I'm going to throw that out there. I feel like if you're in the hobby of really anything, it's pretty obvious. You can ask anything on an active listing, but if nobody's paid that, then that's not what it's going for. You know what I mean? Yeah, I could have a $10 comic and put it on eBay for, $1,000, but that doesn't mean that's what it's going for. So that one, like I said, easy. We're gonna skim past that one and then move on to the fact that you have to be really particular with grades. So yes, you want to use an average when you're looking at sold listings, but you need to be careful and make sure you're paying attention to things. So, for example, if I have a near mint copy of a book, one that I think is pretty good, and I'm looking at sold listings, and I see one, let's just say this book is roughly like most of them are like $50, but then I see one that's sold for 25. Well, if you're not paying that much attention, or maybe you see a couple sold for 25, maybe one for 30 here or there, but if you're not paying attention and you see those lower priced copies, you really go in, you got to look at the pictures. Don't ever look at what the description or the title says. You got to kind of make your own grades. People, especially on eBay, will put near mint on a copy that is got all kinds of spine ticks and bent and ripped in half. They'll put near mint on it. They don't care. So you actually go in and look at the copies of the books, and it takes a little bit longer. You have to put in a little bit more effort for this, but it's definitely worth it. Because again, if I'm looking at, like, let's say I'm trying to price a book to sell, and like I said, it really should be like a $50 book, but then maybe I'm not paying that much attention. I see these 25s and 30 and whatever, and it's like, whatever. I'll just make it a $35 book. Kind of meet somewhere in the middle, or $40 book. It's like, well, I'm kind of cutting myself short, because if I look at all these sold listings for the, one that's in a comparable grade as mine, they're selling for $50. So you have to make sure that, and it goes the other way around too. If I have a, mid-grade copy and their mid-grades are selling for 25, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to try to get 40 out of this one, or 50, because some are selling for 50. I'm going to get 50 out of this. No, those are in a much better condition than the copy I have. So my copy's a $25 copy. You have to pay attention to the grades. And like I said, it can be, a bit of a tedious task, but if you really want to have accurate pricing, that is a very important step, because I see, and I'll go ahead and I guess bring this up a little bit. I'm not a big fan. I know a lot of people like to use it, but they'll use last sold as their price point for something, and I'm not a big fan of last sold. Now, granted, with that, you can still do your due diligence and check to make sure that it's like, oh, well, that last one sold for $25, but it's in a lower grade. I'm going to move, okay, the last one sold in a similar grade to mine, sold for $50. You can make that assumption, or make that, put that work in, But I feel like the even the term last sold is a little misleading, uh, because it does insinuate people need to look up. And this is a thing, we have new people coming into the hobby every day, and so if you're a newer collector and you're like, okay, I should be looking at the last one sold, and you don't know that much about grading comics and everything, I feel like it's an easy way to kind of get a bad habit, and maybe not do all the work that you need to do, because pricing comics is work. Like it is. Obviously, when you have a graded comic, it's super easy. Just look up whatever comic 9.8 or whatever grade it is, 5.0, whatever grade you have. You search up that comic with that grade, and you get to look at all those prices, and you don't really have to do a ton of work. Now, granted, there's a few other factors, like maybe grading companies, or if you have a custom label, or if it's signed or something like that. You have to look out for certain little things. But I mean, for the most part, it's pretty easy. Look up the comic, look up the grade, you have your price. Make an average of the ones that are available, sold listings. But when you're looking at something that's raw, I mean, that's what we're mainly going to be talking about, is raw. Because like I said, graded comics are pretty easy. I like selling graded comics because they're so easy. In that regard, it's like this is the price. It's pretty undeniable. You know what I mean? But with a raw comic, I don't know. Last sold kind of irks me, and like, because for example, if I look at the last 10 sold comics of something, and I'm gonna use similar numbers throughout this whole thing, but like the 9 of them are 50. Even we could say one of them in there's 40 randomly, and then the last one's 25. Does it make it a $25 book? Just because somebody got one on a auction for real cheap, nobody else was paying attention that day. I don't think that's right. If you have a whole lot of data to look at and you ignore most of it, it could go the opposite way as well. And I'm not just like, I don't want to come off as like trying to say you should always reach for the biggest number. Because for example, if again last 10 sold comics, uh, you know, uh, 9 of them are, I don't know, $25 or whatever, and the last one for whatever reason sold for $50. Maybe somebody got into a bidding war. Maybe, I don't know. Sometimes you'll see these, like maybe it's a comic from, I don't know, Canada or something. Sometimes you see these other countries and they'll have weird prices, which is another thing. If it's from a different country, maybe ignore that one, because sometimes they're just very strange. But anyway, so yeah, you have this last one that sold for $50. Is it a $50 comic? No. Now, unless something it's going on the uptrend or something, if those are the last 10 solds, then I would ignore that one in particular, and I'd be like, yeah, it's a $25 comic. 9 out of 10 people pay $25 for it. It's a $25 comic. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of last solds. I whenever I price comics to buy or sell, I'm looking at averages of recent sales, and that's how I come up with my prices for my stuff. Um, with that being said, it's also important to note the age of the info that you're looking at. When you're looking on eBay sold listings, it has a date of when it sold, and each comic will kind of vary on like what old info stands for, or like with the time frame for old info. Because for example, if a new show gets announced, or a new character is going to be in a movie, or this, that, or whatever, if the trailer came out yesterday, then a week ago's information, 2 days ago's information is old information. You can't use that and be like, well, 2 days ago this sold for $1. Well, now the book's going for $25. You know what I mean? There's something that spiked up the heat on it, and it can be kind of tricky sometimes when a book is on the rise and it's kind of finding its place in the market. It can be kind of tricky at those times to really find a good price. Uh, and it's kind of one of those things you kind of just got to bite on it and use the best of your knowledge, because it's going up in price. Has it already hit the limit? Has it already kind of spiked a little bit over, and maybe it's going to start coming down a little bit? There's a lot of things that can happen very fast in those situations. And so in that particular moment, you don't really have a good point of reference. Unfortunately, if you're trying to get your FOMO buys in, Because sometimes it works out. Sometimes you get a comic, maybe it was $1 comic 2 days ago, but you got it at $10, and then a week from now it's $50. You know what I mean? You paid more than what you could have 2 days before, but you know, it has gone up in value. But again, maybe it starts to shoot up, and you pay $50 thinking that's a really good price, and then after a few days, it's down to like 25. So, like I said, it's a bit of a gamble at that point, and it depends on the situation, what character it is, what comic it is, what key value it has, this and that. There's a lot of things that go on into that, and then ultimately just waiting for that market to stabilize. But yeah, old info could also, I mean, that's what I was saying, for like a situation like that, if something newsworthy happens to change the market, definitely, be cautious of that. But also, even if it was like a month ago and, it's calmed down since then, it's like, well, a month ago that trailer came out and it really shot up, but I'm not going to use that price, because if you look at the last, like couple of weeks or even last week, it's like, this is what it's selling for right now. It's spiked up and now it's gone down. There's a lot of different variables, but even longer periods of time, because sometimes you'll just get on there and start scrolling and looking at prices, and maybe you aren't paying attention to the date, and suddenly you're looking at a comic from 3 months ago, and is that information really viable? Possibly. I mean, if it's been consistently a $25 comic for those 3 months, then maybe. But if 3 months ago a comic was one price, and everything else shown from like the past couple of weeks, it says a different price, I would go with the past couple of weeks 100%. But kind of just use your judgment, use your knowledge of, is there something going on around that character recently, to make it go up or down. So keep that in mind. Just looking at the date, because the information, and that's another reason I'm not a big fan of these like collective websites that have values and everything. One, because they generalize, maybe they're putting certain grades together, or maybe this one was signed and whatever, they're just throwing that value in there. But yeah, maybe they're also giving you information from 6 months ago. And this comic market that we're in right now is constantly changing. Sure, like I said, some comics will stay pretty steady for long periods of time, but I mean, there's so many comics that are going up and down and doing weird, just all kinds of crazy things. You have to stay up to date on everything, because you can't right now. Like, everything's just so crazy that I would not be looking at information that old. But another important thing is to look at the outliers. So, for example, and I kind of mentioned it with like the last 10, and this is specifically talking about last sold. So maybe your outlier is the last sold, and that's what I always worry about, and why I don't do last sold. I always look at several listings, sold listings, and do an average of what was going on. But yeah, you might have, if I am looking at the last 10 sold listings, and I'm using, again, the number 10 as a vague number to use right now, but if I'm looking at the last 10 sold listings and they're all 25 and one randomly in there is $50, I'm gonna just ignore that one. I don't count that in. I wouldn't bump it up. It's not a $30 book now. I wouldn't actually make with a technical average. You're supposed to add up the total of everything. So like those 10 comics would all add up divided by 10. And that's not at all the process that I would use on this. If you have an extreme outlier, and we could go even crazier, like they're all 25 and you have one comic that sold for $200, ignore that one. I don't know what happened. I don't know, again, like I said, there's a number of reasons why comics or anything can sell on eBay for dumb prices. Maybe people are trying to change the market, or I don't know. You have a lot of things that could go into it. All I know is that price is not going to be influential in my decision making on the value of any comic. And that goes for something. Sometimes people win comics on auctions for dumb low. If I'm looking at the last 10 and they're all $50, except for one of them sold for $10, I'm going to ignore that one. Somebody got lucky. Good for them. Like, cool for them, but that doesn't affect the value of the book. I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes if an auction ends really like 3 in the morning or something, maybe there's less eyes on it, less people paying attention to it. Um, I had me personally, I had some good luck during December. I made a video about that where I won. What was that Marvel #6, the 1 in 25 Silver Surfer cover? Typically goes for like $200 to $250. I got one for 125, and I really do think it was because people were kind of holding back some of their money, saving up for Christmas gifts. And so I got lucky on that one. Do I think that affects the value of everyone else's comic that has that one? No. Now, granted, if there's more that are sold after mine that are all around $125, yes, then you have a new set of information. But if everything else is $200 plus, and that one that I got's 125, it doesn't make it a $125 comic. I got lucky. Sometimes people get lucky, and it goes the other way too, where sometimes people overbid. Sometimes people get in a bidding war and pay too much for a comic. Um, and it's like that's not really what it's worth. If you can tell that it's an outlier, because if you have a bunch of information and it's like you're looking at the last one sold and it's like $50, $45, $50, $55, $35. I would consider a $35 one. It's like, okay, well that's now granted, if there's only one, it's less important. But if you start looking, it's like, oh, there's a few $35. Then you have a little bit of information to consider into the average of things. But that's, to me, an average is going to be like, what is most people paying for this particular comic? And sometimes you might have a bit of a range on a comic. It's like, well, especially maybe sometimes you get into some bigger comics and it's like, well, sometimes people are paying, $1,200 for this comic, and other times people are paying close to $1,500. That's a big difference. That's a big difference in price. But sometimes, depending on the comic and how hot it is, and different factors, like I said, there's always a million factors going on. But yeah, you might have to find an average between and see how many are closer to 1,200, how many are closer to 1,500. Do you go right in the middle, make it like 1,300 or 1,350, I guess? Or is that 1,200 kind of an outlier where most of them are more like 1,400-ish? Maybe lean more towards that way or the other way, depending on what the information presents to you. And that's kind of my whole point in all of this is use as much information as you can, as much pertinent information as you can. Like I said, a sale from 6 months ago, I don't really consider that pertinent. It really just depends if it's a book that hasn't had anything going on. But even like I don't know, even then like the comic market is still just so, I don't want to say unstable, but just so wild that I don't know. I think 6 months is way too long to be looking at a sales data. It There's just so much that has happened, and people's interests are going from one thing to another, and books will go higher and lower all the time. I think trying to look at the most recent information possible. Now, the one thing I do want to say that sometimes, and I mentioned earlier, sometimes you might want to look at active listings. And there's a few situations, like for example, if you have a really truly unique comic, sometimes it can be really hard to find certain information. Now, this can be a comic that's just really rare. For example, where it is, my All New Ghost Rider 1 in 25. This comic is extremely hard to find. There's very few sold listings. Oftentimes, there's no active listings at all on eBay. And when you have limited information, the rules change a little bit. For example, we'll just talk about this one for, like I was saying. The sales information that I've seen on this one is so conflicting that I wouldn't even know. It's not for sale at all, but if I were to put it for sale, I don't even know what I would try to do for it. I think you have a little bit of liberty to kind of ask whatever you want when something is so unique and hard to find. Now, granted, I can't ask $1 million for it. That's not going to happen. But for example, I paid like $200 for that book, and granted that was like a year-ish ago, something like that. Um, and a lot has happened since then. It definitely, I mean, even the cover A has become a lot more valuable book since then. But you can find the cover A. You can't find that one. Um, I've seen it was a 9.6 that sold roughly for like I think it was like $800. I've seen a 9.8 sell for $1,000. But I've seen recently, I've seen like a damaged non-graded one go for it was like $400 or $500. I saw on a Instagram page, and I wouldn't necessarily use this as pricing, but sometimes when you're, like I said, you just don't really have enough information to go off of. And I did mean to go back and check, but it's a page that I look at their stuff all the time, mainly because they have just incredible, awesome stuff. They're called Instagrails on Instagram, and they sell a lot of comics, and their prices always seem pretty reasonable to me. But they had a raw copy of that book. Now, granted, it was a good-looking copy, but I think they were asking $1,000 for it. Now, like I said, I didn't go back to see if it actually sold. It was a little while ago, but it's like again, you can kind of ask what you want on that book because go find another one. Like you can't. A cool book that my boss recently picked up. It's getting graded right now, but he picked up a Spider-Man 238 first Hobgoblin. It has the tattoos. It's a newsstand and it's a double cover. Um, and I think when he was looking it up, there was one that sold, and I think it was quite a while ago. So it's like that information isn't even relevant anymore. So again, kind of shoot for the stars a little bit. Ask what you want. Ask something crazy, and you can kind of work down or whatever. But ultimately, as a buyer, if that's really what you want, go find another one. Good luck trying. If that's the only one available for purchase, you have a little bit more leeway with the price, and it probably will be something harder to acquire. Um, and like for example, when I first got my X-Men 12 here, it's a 5.5. I think since then there's been more that have sold, but when I first got it, and I was just curious trying to look up the price on it, there were no 5.5s that sold on eBay. There were actually, I don't think there were 5.5 sold or listed, so I had no information in that regard to look at. So I had to look at 6.0s and 5.0s and try to find a middle ground in between those two. So that one was a tricky one to try to get a good value for, because it was like, like I said, graded copies should be easier to price, but sometimes if it's just something that isn't on the market, then it's hard to get a good evaluation of something when there's no data. So I think now, granted, also I guess what I would say about that as well is because I kind of started with it and started talking about other stuff, but looking at active listings can be okay sometimes. Like for example, if I was trying to look up this X-Men 12 5.5 and there's no sold listings, but there are active listings, I can kind of look at the active listings, to get an idea a little bit. I wouldn't hold that information super valid necessarily, but it at least is a starting point and kind of helps me to see. And obviously, I would look at the lowest asked price, because if somebody has one for $1,200 and someone has one for $1,000,000, or whatever, even $2,000, the $2,000 one obviously isn't right, because if it was a $2,000 comic and somebody had one for $1,200, somebody would snatch it up in a heartbeat. But that being said, that $1,200 doesn't necessarily make it a $1,200 comic. It's just a good starting point. Again, and with that particular situation, I would go look at sold 5.0s and 6.0s, and then use that information. Like, okay, there's an active listing for 1,200. Does that kind of match up with what I'm seeing here? And just use different points of reference. Something else that sometimes I'll look at active listings for is if a comic is kind of cooled down, and I see the past, if I would say, if I'm looking at the past 10, and again, I'll just use that as an example, the past 10, I was like, the average of this is like a $50 comic. but and they're recent sales, but it's also kind of started falling off. Um, I I would go look at the active listings because, for example, if I go to the active listings on a comic and suddenly, like they're all $20, if you can buy a comic for $20 and there's many available options, if there's one person asking $20 and everybody else is asking more, maybe not. But if you can see like there's multiple, it's easy to buy that comic for $20, but you're looking at the sold listings and see that they're all 50, then yeah, it's probably not a $50 comic. It's probably on the downtrend. Maybe something happened, like for example, what was that? Spider-Man 361, First Carnage. As soon as that first Carnage trailer came out, that book started going downhill. So maybe something happened to make it in a decrease sharply, or maybe people are just moved on to another book and then that one's going down in value. There's lots of reasons, but like I said, most of the time you don't want to look at active listings, but sometimes it can be helpful. And I guess also in the opposite sense, if a new book has, like I got a good example, like with my Spider-Man 50. I didn't have an intention to sell it necessarily, but I was curious when Kingpin first showed up in Hawkeye, and so I'm trying to look up, and for a little while there wasn't a lot of sold data, right after that. But what I can do is start looking at the active listings, what people are asking for them, and try to get a grasp of like how that book is going up in value. Again, it's not 100% valid data until comics are sold at a certain price. That is what establishes them at that price. There could be a million people asking for $2,000 for that book, but until somebody pays $2,000 for that book, and again, even if one person does it, and with those bigger kind of keys where you don't see a lot of action happening, it can be kind of tricky because it's like, okay, one person paid $2,000 for it. Does that make it a $2,000 book? It's like, I don't know. The last one a few days ago sold for 1,400. We'll say, for example. It's like, I don't know. Did it really jump up that high? The next sale might be $2,000. Might be $1,800. And then it's like, well, okay, do I ignore that 1,400 now and maybe it's like a $1,900 book, or do I keep the 14 in there? Maybe is it really like a $1,700 book? I don't know. It can be kind of tricky when you have limited data, but I don't know. Do your best. Look at as much information as you can, and that's basically what I want to get across. I don't mean to be attacking anyone. I know, like I said, some people. For example, I'll name drop Stevie B. For example, I watch his videos. He'll do mystery boxes, and he does last solds when reviewing the prices on stuff. But I have heard him say, and I can't remember what comic it was, but he's like, well, this one, and it's important to note whether yours is in good condition, mid grade or whatever. So he'd be like, the last couple of these sold for whatever $20, but this one's a little beat up, so it's really like a $10 book, or the other way around. And so I have noticed that it does seem like he does pay attention to grade, despite using the last sold system. Like I said, I mainly feel like that's just not a great way to display it, particularly towards new collectors. And I feel like a lot of people in the community maybe don't really try to cater their words towards new collectors because, I don't know, they're just in it. They've been doing comics for so many years, and they're just talking about what they talk about, and they know what they're talking about, but they don't say it maybe in an instructional way. So I do try to be more careful because I do know there's a lot of new collectors that are constantly asking me questions and are curious and learning about this hobby. And it's just something that I feel I needed to say. Maybe I'll change no one's mind ever. That's fine. But again, I'm just trying to help the best I can. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. Talking about all this eBay stuff, by the way. in my links or in my the description, I have a bunch of different links in my Instagram and this, that, and whatever. But I've started adding my eBay Instagram or not Instagram, my eBay link as well. I'm selling some comics on there. I need to post more on there. I'm also selling some Lego minifigures on there. I have those currently on auction. Just started put those up last night. But yeah, so just keep an eye on my eBay page if you're curious what kind of books I have for sale. Maybe, and I have everything set up as best offers, so maybe if you want to buy a few or whatever, we can set up a deal, this, that, or whatever. Just let me know. You can send me a message on there. You can send me a message on Instagram. It don't really matter to me. But that's all the news I have for you, I think, other than the fact that we're at 781 subscribers currently, which is kind of crazy because I've really kind of stopped even asking for subscribers. I was just like, I'm just going to play it chill for a little bit. But we're still climbing. I appreciate all the support and the new viewers. So we're getting pretty close to that 800 milestone mark where I'll be giving away some more comics. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.